What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Dr. Vincent Esposito, and today we're going to be going over the basics of how to make a tomato sauce. Now, tomato sauce was probably the first thing I learned how to make when I was starting to cook. I think that just came in right after I learned how to boil water and maybe turn on the stove. It was the next thing literally I learned. And I think because we focused on a lot more complex dishes that had a lot of different components, I think it's important to really dial it back, come back to the basics, because once you have those down, then you can really build upon, the skills you have learned and then really become more creative and bring your own flair to the table, literally to the table. So I think once you get into cooking, and I've talked to a few people about this, is you kind of have a reference dish that you might have made before that you can use as a reference to then create and spin off. And sauces for me was a huge thing. So as you might guess, either from my name or where I'm from or my accent or a variety of different other options, Italian food has been a huge part of my life pretty much since I was a kid. So it is no accident that this is the sauce that I come back to when I learn how to make, say, for instance, curries or some other saucy type thing. I always use my base like, oh, these are the basics on how to build the tomato sauce. It's just picking and using different ingredients to kind of create different flavors from different cultures. And since, the big thing on this channel is learning skills and the basics, we really want to start with the simpler things, mastering the basics, so that then you can become kind of a pro home cook in your own right. Now, tomato sauce for me is particularly a sticking point because very often you're gonna see either tons of cheese or other things added into it. Obviously, if you've listened to anything on this channel before, this is going to be a vegan variety. And believe it or not, when you stick to like the simple ingredients, you can actually make a very healthy tomato sauce. And if you're using a certain type of pasta you might like, or you add other veggies, you can add more complexity and even more kind of nutritious ingredients. But really the basics go a long way. For example, garlic and onions contain some compounds that are known to have, say, antibacterial and antifungal properties. We've talked about tomatoes before, specifically the canned variety. So if you're interested in that, check those out in the video here. Tomatoes are obviously known for their lycopene and vitamin C content, along with a bunch of other nutrients too. And when you throw those three ingredients together with some other spices and aromatics, you can really add a ton of flavor to a dish. Now, obviously, since we're not making this, say, a meat sauce, or we're not adding cheese to it, we are gonna add flavor in a different way. And I actually have a pesto I made, so I'm gonna make some kind of pesto beans that I'll show quickly. But the focus of this video is gonna be the marinara sauce, and we're gonna break down every step in detail. I will show you all the secrets that I learned growing up, and you can kind of decide on your own maybe which ones you wanna use and which ones you can incorporate in your own home cooking to make your version of the best tomato sauce. Because let's face it, I know in my life, everyone's grandma makes the best tomato sauce. So you need to figure out what works for you and simply just find what you like. And like I said, this is gonna be a very basic interpretation, so you can definitely add your own spices and flavorings to it. But let's get right to it. I will get my ingredients prepped and I will walk you through everything I'm adding to this dish. But before we get to that really quick, as you guys know, we started our online plant-based cooking classes. So twice a week, you can go live with me, make dishes from scratch. It's a chance to ask me any questions. We could walk through recipes step by step. I do take your input, so if you do want me to cover a certain recipe or certain ingredient, or maybe do, kids recipes or anything like that, could absolutely cover that there. But let's get right into it. I'm gonna get my ingredients prepped, and I will walk you through the basics of making this dish. So I will see you there. Okay, so the way we're gonna break it up today is we are going to be going over the basics of a traditional marinara sauce from Italy, a traditional tomato sauce, and then go over the additional ingredients that we're gonna add to bring a bunch more flavor here. So tomatoes are the first thing we're gonna add today. So the tomatoes, I recommend, if you could probably notice, these are from a can. They're organic canned tomatoes. I do recommend, if you are gonna get canned tomatoes, definitely make sure that they have no other additives, they're not seasoned with anything. Really wanna make sure they're just tomatoes, so no added salt, basil, whatever. You really wanna build that flavor on your own. That's really a key to start. And obviously if you wanna use fresh tomatoes, you can do that too. Then we have our aromatics, so we're gonna build this in layers. So we have pretty much a whole head of garlic here, and we have a white onion diced. Now, those are the basic traditional ingredients. I'm gonna add a little heat. So this is actually a habanero, not a traditional ingredient. I'll talk about that more in a little bit. Then we obviously have our pasta, which we're gonna make. So this is a green lentil pasta. You can use really any pasta you like. I want to use this one because this isn't really a dish that brings a great deal of protein to the table. Not that you need to eat a ton of protein, but I actually do like the flavor of it. It'll bring a nice difference here. You definitely want to go with garnishes. So this is just some roughly chopped parsley to finish. And then we're gonna have some salt and some pepper. And these are really the basic ingredients you need. That's really it. Now, since we're not adding cheese, we want to go over some other things we can add to bring more flavor to the table here. Now, again, these ingredients are not necessarily traditional, but they're going to bring a ton more flavor and replace something, say, like shredded Parmesan cheese. So we're going to blanch some spinach since we're boiling water anyway. That's going to actually go a really long way in terms of adding a little green and brightness to this dish. Also adds another technique we can kind of go over. Some cannellini beans and some pesto. So this is actually a watercress pesto that I made, playing around with that. So we're gonna add some beans to that to give some sort of salinity and, you know, make it more of kind of a filling dish. And then to just add other spices. So this is actually some dried thyme. We're gonna add some of that and paprika. Now these are not necessarily Italian ingredients per se. You can add things like oregano or other dried herbs, but I don't particularly love the flavor of oregano in a sauce, so I don't particularly add it often. But we're gonna add these and I will kind of go over how we use them step by step right now. So let's build the base and get this whole thing started. Okay, so we're gonna start off with a little bit of oil in our pan. We're gonna get that moving. We want that hot. We're gonna set our pan to a medium heat before we go in with our aromatics. So we're gonna go in with that diced white onion, that head of garlic, and we're gonna add our habanero. Now that's gonna add a little heat. That's optional, like I said. And then we just wanna season with a little bit of salt. You kinda wanna season a little bit at each layer here. This is gonna build flavor. So a little bit of salt and pepper here. And we're just gonna kinda stir this down until that onion is translucent. It's gonna take 4 or 5 minutes. Since we added our garlic into it, you want to make sure it doesn't burn. Now, once that's done, we're going to go in with all of our tomatoes. And I just added a little water to get a little bit of the tomatoes out of the bowl that were kind of sticking. Then we're going to season with a little bit of salt and pepper again. And here we're going to go in with some of that thyme. Now, if you have other woody herbs, things like oregano, you could put them in here too because they will cook down well. Now, we also add our paprika here for smokiness. And then we're going to bring this to a boil. We're going to cover it and then reduce our heat to a simmer. And want to cook this down for at least 20 minutes. Want that to reduce and thicken a little bit. Now, while that's going, we're going to get the rest of our ingredients together here. So first, we're going to start with our spinach. And we're going to wilt this down in our boiling pasta water. Now, this is going to blanch in like 30 to 60 seconds. It's not going to take long. It'll keep it kind of crisp and cook it down very quickly, but we could add it to the pasta versus cooking it in the sauce and you might get some of that spinach flavor. Whereas if we cook it separate and then add it at the end, you don't get some of that aftertaste. Now we can add that pasta we have and bring that to a boil. And we're really just going to cook that according to the package instructions. Now, all pastas are different, so it doesn't make sense to kind of just go with a hard and fast rule here. But once that's done, we're gonna kind of take that out with a strainer, and then we wanna run it under cold water to stop the cooking process. Now, since we're gonna add this to the sauce to finish cooking, I want it a little bit underdone for that reason. So when we add it to our pasta sauce, it'll cook because the pasta sauce is hot. Now here, I'm just gonna get those beans kind of ready to go. I have a couple cloves of garlic that are minced. Quickly gonna just saute these down 30 seconds until they're fragrant or so. Then we're just going to add in our beans and we're going to season these very quickly, just a little salt and pepper before we add that pesto that we made. Now, again, the reason for this is since this is a vegan version here, you want to add some salinity, some other kind of factor. So there is no hard and fast rule as to what you use here, but because I had this pesto made and because beans bring kind of like a protein element that you don't necessarily have with this dish otherwise, I thought this would be a good choice. But the reality is here you can get creative and really add whatever you want. Now, we're just going to saute this down for a few minutes. We really just want to make sure that the beans are evenly coated and everything's kind of warmed through. Now you could see, if you look around the edges, that our sauce has reduced quite a bit here. Now we're going to season with salt and pepper to taste. You really don't want to add too much salt before this because, again, you can't take salt out. You can only put salt in. So if you add too much salt initially, that's where you're going to really run into problems. Now, once that pasta is coated, we're going to add in our spinach. We're going to take some of that pasta water that we actually saved. That's why we strain the pasta out. That's going to thicken up. They'll take the starches. That's going to thicken up the sauce itself. And that'll give it more of a kind of thicker texture once we get down to it. And then really, it just comes down to plating. So we're going to go in with a couple spoonfuls of the pasta itself. We're going to top that off with some of the beans and the pesto that we made. Very simple, nothing over the top, but it's going to be packed with a ton of flavor. And then, of course, with whatever garnishes you want. I went here with parsley, but you can use red chili flakes. You can use any combination of other spices. Basil works really well here, and it's really up to you. So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. This was a really fun one. I do think this is the best version of a tomato sauce. Now, if you think otherwise, leave a comment and tell me what it is in the description below. Again, if you guys want to make more stuff like this, we're doing classes twice a week, so you can join us there. Thank you for tuning in this week. Really appreciate you sticking around to the end, and I will see you next Thursday. Have a wonderful weekend.